Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's investor webinar with Heranova Lifesciences, where we'll be joined by two members of the Heranova management team, where they will dive into the Heranova story, why they're differentiated, and what's exciting about the opportunity right now. So without further ado, let's jump right in. We're going to start with a couple introductions with the team. So we have two out of the four core members of management on the call right now. That is John Fair and Dr. Faraday Bischoff. So what I'm going to do is direct it to them, let them do their introductions, and then we'll jump right into the today's presentation. So, John, would you like to kick things off?
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. John Fair, Chief Business Officer, joined Heranova recently, really off the back of the science and technology that's being developed here at Heranova, particularly in endometriosis and broadly in women's health. Spent my career, most of my career in women's health and commercial consulting, and started as a early career experience in the payer world. So happy to be here, and I'll pass it over to Faraday.
Great. Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Faraday Bischoff, Chief Medical Officer of Heranova, their diagnostic division. I come with the background in academics initially. I spent 15 years at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, where I was part of the faculty within the obstetrics and gynecology division. There, I was served as one of the leading visionaries in really identifying ways of doing diagnostics in the absence of tissue. And you'll see how in a moment in this presentation today. From Baylor, I then moved on to a number of academic commercial roles where I've always served in the executive role, but overseeing diagnostics and assay development. I've commercialized a number of assays, specifically in breast cancer and women's health. And today you'll hear more about what we're doing on endometriosis. So I'll begin first with this high-level overview. Endometriosis is a highly prevalent condition that impacts 1 in 10 women in the US, but also around the world. The disease is characterized as the growth of endometrial tissue outside of the uterus. So it grows like a uterus, but it grows in the wrong location. This out-of-placement growth of tissue causes severe pain in some women, but also inflammatory reactions that then cause other downstream events that can be impactful. Most notably, what this condition causes is it impacts the quality of life. It can also impact fertility. In fact, as many as 50% of women who present to IVF clinics are found to have endometriosis. So the symptoms of this condition are quite varied. They can be different from one woman as compared to another woman, but the most common symptoms that are observed are pelvic pain, painful periods, as well as pain with intercourse. These women often experience these symptoms at different levels. Severity can vary. And overall, this is what makes it difficult to diagnose this condition early on. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes our product, the Heranova. This is a target profile slide that highlights the intended use. This Heranova test is intended to diagnose the presence or absence of endometriosis in women who show symptoms that range from mild to severe of pelvic pain, abnormal bleeding. Based on those symptomologies, these women are typically considered suspicious of having endometriosis. And however, they may not get a diagnosis right away unless this test is given. The test itself uses blood. So blood in this case is an alternative to a tissue biopsy. Blood is easily collected and accessible. And again, from a technical side, it's easy to validate and develop. The platform we use is called quantitative PCR. So using blood and quantitative PCR were able to measure the levels of target molecules called circulating microRNAs. These microRNAs are known to be associated with endometriosis. What have we done at Heranova to demonstrate the efficacy of this test is to demonstrate, number one, that we can identify patients using these biomarkers. The data we've generated is data comparing our blood-based test to a tissue-based result. So a comparison to gold standard today, which is not routinely done on women. That's why a non-invasive test is so important. And as I said, the test is based on a simple blood draw and analysis. The next slide. The next slide demonstrates some of the preliminary data generated to show efficacy in using circulating microRNAs in blood as a biomarker to detect this condition. This slide here illustrates the use of 5 circulating microRNAs as biomarkers for endometriosis. Women who are highlighted here in the gold boxes are women with endometriosis, and women who are normal and don't have endometriosis are highlighted or identified in the green boxes as shown on this slide. So for the 5 different panels, what you see is evidence showing that 5 individual markers that we've identified can clearly separate your population of women with endometriosis in gold as compared to women that are normal and do not have endometriosis in green. This is what's called proof of concept, demonstrating that we've identified markers that are informative for detecting endometriosis. When we run this now as a diagnostic test on a series of prospectively collected patient samples, we demonstrate that, in fact, this blood test can yield an accuracy as good as, if not better than, what you're able to achieve today by gold standard. So the graph here shows a sensitivity that is greater than 90%. Using our blood-based HerResolve test. When we look at the standard gold standard approach of diagnosing endometriosis, which is done through surgical laparoscopy with or without histology, you'll note that although the sensitivity may be 90 or 82%, the actual overall accuracy is below 80% for the gold standard method. And this is primarily because of the specificity of the assay. How well can the assay detect endometriosis? And as you see here in the graph, the green bar is our specificity, which on this slide is well above 85%. So this performs much better than what we're able to do today using gold standard methods. We did this using artificial intelligence and machine learning. By using this methodology, we're able to develop models that in turn are algorithms that we use just like software. So that is what we did here in demonstrating an accuracy of greater than 90%. The final slide of my section, is really to sum up some of the key points that I've made here today. Endometriosis is a unrecognized disease in terms of unmet diagnostic requirements. We, Heranova, are emerging as a leader in this space by developing non-invasive diagnostics initially here for endometriosis. This diagnostic test is groundbreaking in that it uses a blood sample in order to confirm the presence or absence of disease without the need of a surgical procedure. Ultimately, what this says is with our test, one can avoid unnecessary surgery when the test result is made available to physicians who can then determine what the next best course of action is for the patient. So our major milestones thus far have been discovery of new novel markers that can differentiate endometriosis from normal and other gynecologic conditions. We put together a diagnostic assay that utilizes blood, which is an easy biologic to collect worldwide, and for analysis on a platform that's readily available worldwide, and demonstrating that the efficacy of the test meets the acceptance criteria of gold standard diagnostics today, which is surgery. And then finally, on a regulatory front, we have met with the FDA. The FDA has acknowledged we're a 510K de novo submission, and therefore we're in the process of submitting our 510K application this year with clearance, hopefully by the end of the year. We also have a commercial and marketing plan where we will be the first to market in the US of a laboratory developed test for endometriosis, followed soon by the 510K cleared product. Next slide. I believe at this point, I then hand it back off to John Fair, who will talk about the commercial highlights.
Excellent. Thank you, Faraday. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, Andrew. And just to pick up where Faraday left off in terms of the commercial opportunity, one of the things we are so excited about is this really is a breakthrough opportunity. And that's hard to say in diagnostics in general, but in women's health particular. So, the problem is, as we bring it back to what the critical unmet need is right now the gold standard for diagnosing endometriosis is a surgical procedure, which is hard to believe. And usually it takes between 7 to 10 providers before she gets her diagnosis, and it can take anywhere from 7 to 10 years for her to get her diagnosis. These procedures are painful, they're expensive, and in many cases, they're not necessary. In fact, you can see on this slide, in half of all patients, one study suggests that half of the patients that are having this procedure for endometriosis don't even have endometriosis. So what we're planning to do with this test is take diagnostics to the next level. So no longer do you need a surgical procedure for a diagnosis. Surgery can now be treatment. You'll have a diagnosis that is non-invasive, that is easy to perform, easy to use, and allows the provider to take that next best action, as Faraday mentioned. So you can go to the next slide, Andrew. So HerResolve, we think, is a game changer. Right now, there are no non-invasive opportunities to diagnose endometriosis in the market. There are a number of competitors who are on the landscape who are talking about coming to market, but as far as we know, and as Faraday mentioned in her last section of her presentation, we are at the FDA. We are a de novo product, which means there's nobody ahead of us. We are the first ones. So we believe we will be the first to market with this technology, with this solution, and we believe we will change the game in terms of how women get diagnosed with endometriosis, and we're looking forward to that. You can go to the next slide, and I'll give you a sense of how big we think that opportunity can be. So this is what we believe is a reasonable market opportunity, $500 million in the US from a commercial opportunity, and that covers a number of different provider profiles. So if you think about endometriosis, it is a women's health condition. So primarily you will be seeing OBGYNs as a sort of the primary call point for us as we go to market. But what we've learned from our advisory boards and talking with HCPs in this sector is that it's not just OBGYNs. It's going to be pediatricians. It's going to be family practitioners. It's going to be anyone who suspects there might be endometriosis, but is reluctant to send the patient for a surgical procedure for confirmation. So we know that the opportunity is going to be big. We also know that, as Faraday brought this out in the beginning of her presentation, 50% of unexplained infertility is endometriosis. So we also believe there's a big population in reproductive health or IVF that will benefit from this test. So as we think about that market opportunity and coming to market, it's really those patient populations and those provider profiles that we're going to be targeting. And we can see really rapid uptake and growth for this particular technology, across that provider landscape. And one thing I want to bring in back on a full circle is, and Faraday mentioned this at the opening of the call, is right now there is no companion diagnostic for endometriosis. There are a number of medically approved therapies on the market from large pharmaceutical companies, but there are no companion diagnostics. So this becomes a de facto companion diagnostic for anybody that's going to bring a drug to market, or is developing a drug for endometriosis, or has a drug on the market for endometriosis. Finding endometriosis patients is very difficult. So we believe, again, the opportunity for this particular technology is very large and very compelling. So with that, I think we're getting to the end of the presentation. So I think maybe, Andrew, we can open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John and Faraday, both super insightful and extremely helpful to the audience, I'm sure. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to take some Q&A from the audience right now. And so we'll give it, 60 seconds for people to submit their questions. You can submit those in the chat box that you'll be able to see on the platform you're viewing this video on. But while we wait for those questions, I think I'll just kind of highlight what that last point you made, John, the companion diagnostic angle. And I think that's something that goes underappreciated when you think about the diagnostic opportunity here, right? Because there's a fairly large market, that $500 million market we talked about, for the diagnostic solution, and saving the healthcare system lots of money. But you don't really think about that, how much this could help on patient stratification with those developing therapeutics and identifying clinical trials and filling the funnel in terms of what patients can enter those clinical trials and produce the results we want to see. So there really is a massive impact, not just on the diagnostic angle, but the therapeutic landscape here, and trying to find a solution and a treatment for those battling this horrific disease. So I just want to make sure I took a second to highlight that, because I think that's one of the bigger aspects of this opportunity here. But with that, I think I see a couple questions coming in, so let me just pull that up. Okay, cool. Yeah, we have a couple questions here, so let's kick this off. So this first one I'm saying, I think that's probably gonna be more for Faraday. So the first one is, how complicated is this test to perform, and what is the turnaround time? So kind of a two-part question here.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Andrew. The test is quite straightforward. It's a simple blood draw. Once the blood is drawn, it's then sent to the lab. The lab then does their processing to isolate serum and then do the analysis on PCR. So it's a very straightforward test. The turnaround time itself is no longer than 5 to 7 working days. We think we can do it shorter, but in order to manage a flow through the lab, we think 5 to 7 days is more than adequate.
Fantastic. Another question here that I think is probably also designed for you, Faraday. But someone submitted, why did you choose to use miRNA versus tissue or saliva for this test?
Okay, so circulating microRNAs are relatively new in the form of as biomarkers, and readily they're stable in blood. Blood, again, as I said, is easy to collect. It's easy for standardization in a lab. Saliva, on the other hand, is a bit more challenging. As you know, endometriosis is a gynecologic disease. And when you look at the physical body, saliva, which is more in the oral cavity, is very far from the area where the condition is really occurring. So, and not only that, but one has to really standardize how you use or collect saliva. On the other hand, blood is very straightforward. Blood is drawn, collected, and then processed.
Great. Thank you for that. Moving on, it looks like we have a couple more that are probably leaning towards more of John. Let's see. How big is the market opportunity for this test?
That's a great question. So, I mean, the data would suggest that roughly 10% of women have endometriosis in terms of the incidence and prevalence, but we think it's actually much larger than that, because if you think about the symptoms of endometriosis, and what those symptoms are, which is pelvic pain, menstrual cramping. It's probably closer to 20 million women in the US that are probably candidates for this test, meaning they may not have endometriosis, but there may be a suspicion of endometriosis. And that's the beauty of the test. It's going to give you a rule in or rule out. So the presence or absence. So if it's there, then the provider can take the next best action. If it's not there, then there's some additional work that needs to be done, but it provides the clarity that she's been looking for and providers have been looking for in a way that's non-invasive to her. So, it's an enormous opportunity. As I mentioned previously, it's an untapped market right now because the gold standard is a surgical procedure. Many providers and many patients are reluctant to go to that step to get that confirmation. So that's why they're waiting 7 to 10 years in some cases to be diagnosed. And the problem with that is the longer you wait, the worse the condition gets. So the earlier you intervene, the better the outcome. So we believe this test can really shorten the time to diagnosis and therefore improve outcomes. So there's going to be benefits really across the board.
Great. Well, I see a couple more questions here. I think looking at the clock, we probably only have time for one more. So I'm gonna ask one more here, and then for those of you who submitted a question that maybe we didn't get to today, I believe we have your contact information, so we'll follow up directly and set up a call if need be. But I think this is a good one to end on. This question is, how much will you charge for the test, and what have your conversations been with payers, understanding that this might be a somewhat difficult reimbursement landscape?
That's a great question. So what we're seeing in the data is if you look at what that surgical procedure costs the system, it's north of $12,000 per episode, and in some cases, well north of that. So we believe that our test is going to come in way below that number, but still add a tremendous amount of value back to the system. And in terms of reimbursement, I think this is where this test really stands out because this is a provider. And again, I started my career off in the payer world, provider world. So I have a little bit of frame of reference here, but this is what really plans are looking for and payers are looking for is cost savings and cost benefit, right? And that's what this test is going to deliver is really the benefit to the patient and the provider and the system, because you're no longer going to need to have a surgery to make a diagnostic confirmation where half the cases it's not endometriosis anyway. So we have had some early conversations to answer the question. We've had some early conversations with the reimbursement professionals and done some advisory boards. We're getting a lot of positive signals. So we don't anticipate reimbursement being a challenge for this test, and we're excited to be able to offer it to providers and to patients.
Fantastic. And I'm sure, just to add on the end there, I'm sure the point of the companion diagnostic probably makes that, payers a little more open to considering that reimbursement landscape too, given that is an important aspect of the test and attribute that you guys have and the capability you have to install. So that's great. So anyways, I think that's all we have time for today. Like I said, if we didn't get your question, apologies, but we will be sure to follow up directly with you and answer that. And in the meantime, before we wrap up, I'll just throw it over to John and Faraday for kind of any closing remarks they might have before we wrap up here.
Well, I just like to thank everyone for tuning in and give us the opportunity to present the Heranova story to you at a high level. Certainly be happy to dive deeper if you're interested, and feel free to contact Andrew or the company, and we can give you more details on the test and our plans to go to market. But thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you all. Thank you.